Number 13. Royal Hope Hospital, Florida, USA. First on the list is a hospital located in Florida, USA, known to many by its gruesome history. Royal Hope Hospital was a Spanish military hospital from 1784 to 1821 and was eventually demolished through time. Finally, a replica of the original hospital was built to house the victims during the Seminole War. However, when the city workers were about to repair the water lines and penetrate the area of the old building, they found out that the hospital was originally built on what appeared to be an ancient Native American burial ground. Visitors of the Spanish Military Hospital Museum would often mention qualities of groans and shouts coming from unoccupied rooms, adding up to the chill. Real ill beds moved all over the place, beverages jars sliding across over outside seats, and the frequenting sound of marching feet in an unfilled upstairs region. Frequently encounters of strange events and apparition sightings were told and are still being experienced by guests. Paranormal experts once claimed that the place is a real breeding ground of haunted Florida soul and paranormal movement, and according to them, these sorts of haunting inclines to be present in these zones where human feeling and emotion is or was focused on at the time. Number 12. Tranquil Sanatorium, Canada. Tranquil Sanatorium was built in 1907 as a ranch before the owners began caring for tuberculosis patients. A small community known as Tranquil was built around it. The community has its beautiful gardens, houses, a farm, a fire department, and more facilities. In 1958, the hospital closed and was reopened in 1959 to treat the mentally ill. It closed permanently in 1983. However, not everything is tranquil at the sanatorium. Spirits persist in knocking about the place. The years of isolation and sadness seems to have been absorbed into the surroundings. And on occasion, those emotions can be felt by the living and haunting encounters can occur. It would seem that Tranquil Sanatorium just might be haunted. Today, strange floating orbs throughout the facility, inexplicable feelings of sadness, unease, and dramatic temperature changes still invade the house. There have also been stories about mysterious voices and ghostly figures, one of which is that of a nurse who was brutally murdered by a patient. Number 11. Severall's Hospital, England. Severall's Hospital in Colchester, Essex, United Kingdom was a psychiatric hospital built in 1910 to the designs of architect Frank Whitmore. It opened in May 1913 and housed some 2,000 patients. Most of the buildings are in the Queen Anne style, with few architectural embellishments typical of the Edwardian period. The most ornate buildings are the Administration Building, Larch House, and Severall's House, formerly the Medical Superintendent's residence. The reputation for being extremely haunted in this context shouldn't come as a surprise. The hospital closed as a psychiatric hospital in the early 1990s following the closure of other mental institutions. However, a small section remained open until 20 March 1997 for the treatment of elderly patients suffering from the effects of severe stroke. However, ghost hunters are still very interested in this place in search of encounters of the critical kind. Whittingham Hospital, England. Whittingham Hospital was a psychiatric hospital in the parish of Whittingham near Preston, Lancashire, England. It opened in 1873 as the 4th Lancashire County Asylum and grew to be the largest mental hospital in all of Britain. However, in 1967, the hospital faced a controversy involving complaints of mistreatment in 2 male and 2 female wards in the St. Luke's division, with the worst being in Ward 16 for women. Complaints were reported such as patients being locked in small rooms under staircases, in washrooms, and outside in the airing courts, regardless of weather. Others include patients being dragged by their hair, a wet towel treatment where a damp towel would be wrapped around the patient's neck to induce unconsciousness, nurses setting fires to a patient's clothing while worn, beatings, and vermin infestation. An investigation took place, and as a result, both the head male nurse and the matron took early retirement. 2 male nurses were convicted of theft, and in a separate incident, another nurse was jailed for manslaughter after an elderly patient he had assaulted later died. The negative imagery of this hospital exists for a reason. It offers the kind of hauntings you most likely would never want to encounter.
9. Old Changi Hospital, Singapore. Located in Changi, Singapore, Changi Hospital was previously known as Royal Air Force RAF Hospital and was merged with the Toa Payoh Hospital and renamed as the Changi General Hospital. After it was closed in 1997, it sat abandoned for over a decade. Regarded as one of the most haunted places in Singapore, Old Changi Hospital was captured by the Japanese forces during World War II, and was used as a healthcare facility for the prisoners of war detained at the Changi military base nearby. The uneasy feeling of the visitors was probably brought by those people who lost their lives in the hands of the Japs and are still seeking revenge, up to this time. According to some, the terrifying moments, excitement, and adventures were not worth in exchange for what followed them home.
Forgive me if I screw up this name, but I'm going to try and pronounce it correctly. Number 8, Sai Ying Pun Psychiatric Hospital in Hong Kong. Built in 1892, Sai Ying Pun was also a Japanese World War II structure. The Victorian complex is rumored to have served as an execution hall by the Japanese troops. It was later transformed into a psychiatric institution following the war, then fell into disrepair and was severely ruined by 2 fires, which were believed to be inadvertently started by trespassers. Tales of ghostly sightings were spread since it was abandoned in the 1970s. It has come to be known as the High Street Ghost House, due to the many tales of the supernatural that have emerged. Visitors have confessed the sounds of a woman crying or a loud booming sound emanating from the building, mysterious footsteps to recurring sightings of a devilish figure in traditional Chinese costume bursting into flames, specifically on the building's 2nd floor. Number 7, Clark Air Base Hospital, Philippines. The Clark Air Base Hospital, which served as the air base from the early 1900s until 1991 and is now abandoned, and was cited by Ghost Hunters International as one of the most haunted places in the world. Clark Air Base has a long, violent, and often bloody history in the Philippines and is considered one of the most haunted places in the archipelago. The base also was the dwelling place to which many wounded American soldiers evacuated during the Vietnam War, and the traumas and the deaths from that conflict have also left their mark on the spirit present in the hospital. Paranormal activities are reported in the abandoned Clark Air Base Hospital, where headless apparitions and mysterious voices are simply common occurrences for the Filipinos nearby. Violent spirits observed and attested by the residents have rendered the area off limits to everyone. And in the Clark Museum nearby, the ghost of a serviceman who committed suicide still haunts the place, where he hanged himself. It is remarkable that the hospital is one of the few areas that ghost hunters ever examined that was deemed disturbed. Number 6. Monkton Hall Hospital, England. Built in 1530, Knockton Hall's background has much to tell if history is the target. It is a Grade II listed building in the village of Knockton in Lincolnshire, England. From a manor house, the building was later used as a convalescence home for wounded American officers during the First World War. It was used again during the Second World War as a military hospital and has been used similarly ever since. It reverted to private use in the 1980s until a major fire struck the building and left it in a derelict state. In another tale, it says that a young woman was raped and murdered by the son of the owner of the place back when it was a manor house. Today, her presence has been reported by various people who have stayed at the building, haunting one particular room, with many a person claiming to have seen the ghostly image appear in the room precisely at 4:30 a.m. Number 5. Ariat Lunatic Asylum, Australia. The ever-famous Ariat Lunatic Asylum in Australia is now called Armadale. It was the largest in all of Australia when it opened in 1867. Throughout its functional existence, the healthcare facility held tens of thousands of patients, including the most dangerous, hysterical, and violent psychotics in the world. To feel the chills about the place, an astounding 13,000 people died in the facility within its 130 years of service. This is enough reason for it to be named as one of the most haunted places in the country. Moreover, the facility reopened in 2001 as a campus after concluding its healthcare services in 1998. Would you mind taking higher education in the said institute? I bet it would be fun.
Number 3. Beechworth Lunatic Asylum, Australia. Beechworth Lunatic Asylum, formerly known as the Haunted Mayday Hills Lunatic Asylum, is a decommissioned hospital in Victoria, Australia. Both Beechworth and Ararat No. 5 were opened in the same year, after Victoria's lone mental institution suffered became overcrowded. The facility lasted for 128 years and closed its doors in 1995. Ghost tours now run in the building as visitors are regaled with terrifying tales, including the story of James Kelly, uncle of the notorious bushranger, Ned Kelly. Charged with attempted murder, he was initially sentenced to death in June 1868, was downgraded to 10 years hard labor. He was released from jail to be sent to Ararat Lunatic Asylum and later transferred to the Beechworth Lunatic Asylum, where he died on August 26, 1903. More than 9,000 inmates lost their lives within the walls of the asylum, including a young girl, who was mysteriously thrown from a high window, with the reason never being explained. No worries. She is either friendly or oblivious towards the living. Ugh. Number 2. Taunton State Hospital, Massachusetts, USA. Built in 1854, Taunton State Hospital was as a psychiatric hospital located in Taunton, Massachusetts, and it brags a horrible yet alarming history. You would understand the entire story if you are aware of the hospital's most famous patient, Jane Toppan, a serial killer who confessed to having murdered at least 31 people while working as a nurse. However, the story involving the people who ran the hospital is even more terrifying than many of the criminally insane patients it housed. Tales that are beyond our imagination has often been the subject of talk, including satanic rituals that had been carried out in the basement by the doctors and nurses using the unwilling patients for the proceedings. Since then, it is believed that the basement area has long been consumed by a shadowy figure who would come out and crawl onto the walls to watch the patients in the hospital. Number 1. Waverly Hills Sanatorium, Kentucky, USA. Located in southwestern Louisville/Jefferson County, Kentucky, the Waverly Hills Sanatorium is a closed sanatorium opened in 1910 as a two-story hospital to accommodate 40 to 50 tuberculosis patients. The hospital immediately became overcrowded though, and with donations of money and land, a new hospital was started in 1924. Though death estimates vary widely, at least 6,000 people died at Waverly Hills during its 50-plus years in operation. And after all of the death, pain, and agony within these walls, Waverly Hills is considered to be one of the most haunted places in the country. Today, the hospital is briefly known for its primary purpose in the past, but made a great name for being haunted. Ghost stories began to circulate, like the little girl who was seen running up and down the third-floor solarium, the little boy Timmy who was spotted with a leather ball, the hearse that appeared in the back of the building dropping off coffins, the woman with the bleeding wrists who cried for help, and a man in a white coat who has been seen walking towards the kitchen, and the smell of cooking food that sometimes wafts through the room. Visitors told of banging doors, lights in the windows when there should have been none, mysterious sounds and eerie footsteps in the hallways and empty rooms. Apart from these unnamed apparitions, the tales involving the fifth floor of the building are the most widely reported. Stories say that in 1924, the head nurse was found dead in room 502. She allegedly committed suicide by hanging herself from an exposed pipe or light fixture. She was 29 years old at the time of her death and supposedly devastated, pregnant, but unmarried. Her depression over the situation led her to take her own life. It's unknown how long she may have been hanging in this room before her body was discovered. And this would not be the only tragedy to occur in this room. Another creepy legend involves another nurse who worked in room 502 again, and was said to have jumped over the window 4 years later. No one knows the exact reason why she would have done this, but many speculated that she might have been pushed over the edge. There are no records to indicate this, but rumors continue to persist. Regardless of the tale, many Waverly visitors are convinced that an anguished entity lurks in room 502. Now that plans have been developed to convert the paranormal hotspot into a 4-star hotel, you should be making hotel reservations as early as now. I would suggest a simple, yet recognizable room on the 5th floor. Perhaps